Peter and the Pocket Guide to Hunting Vampires and Other Demon-like Creatures, Episode 8, The Untouchables, by Rich von Halt. The black mob car rolled to a stop in front of the yawning mouth of the vampire cave. Perched atop the jagged rocks framing the entrance, 10 young-looking vampires watched with predatory stillness. Inside the car, Peter killed the engine, plunging the interior into darkness. "Are you ready?" His voice cut through the tense silence. Pete's reply came swift and sure. "Yeah." "Do you have anything else besides my mom's stuff?" Peter's words carried a hint of desperation. A rustling from the back seat preceded Pete's response. "Of course, Peter. I have this." He hefted a gleaming axe, its blade catching the faint moonlight seeping through the windows. Relief washed over Peter. "Oh, thank God," he breathed, his grip on the steering wheel loosening. They stepped out of the car, the night air thick with anticipation. The vampires stirred, their movements fluid and unnatural. In a blur of motion, they launched themselves from the rocks, diving towards Pete and Peter like a swarm of lethal bats. Pete tightened his hold on the axe, his knuckles turning white. The weight of the weapon anchored him, a tangible reminder of the battle to come. Beside him, Peter stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching threat. The first vampire reached them, its fangs bared in a vicious snarl. Pete swung the axe in a wide arc, the blade whistling through the air. It connected with a sickening crunch, cleaving the creature's skull in two. Blood sprayed, painting the ground in a macabre canvas. Peter dodged another vampire's claws, his reflexes honed by years of training. He lashed out with a swift kick, sending the creature stumbling backwards. The vampire hissed, its eyes blazing with fury. The battle raged on, Pete and Peter moving in a deadly dance, their weapons flashing in the moonlight. Vampires fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground in broken heaps. But for everyone they struck down, another seemed to take its place, the horde relentless in its assault. Sweat beaded on Pete's brow as he swung the axe again and again, his muscles burning with exertion. Peter fought beside him, his fists and feet a blur of motion. They were a formidable team, their bond forged in the heat of battle. As the last vampire fell, its head rolling to a stop at Pete's feet, an eerie silence descended upon the scene. The only sound was their labored breathing, harsh in the stillness of the night. They exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the ordeal they had survived. But even as they caught their breath, they both knew this was only the beginning. The vampire cave loomed before them, its depths promising even greater horrors. With grim determination, Pete and Peter turned towards the entrance, ready to face whatever lurked within. Peter and Pete cautiously approached the vampire cave's entrance, their footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness. Suddenly, vampires landed behind and in front of them, blocking their path. They halted, exchanging a tense glance. "Quick, get back to back," Peter commanded, his voice low and urgent. They positioned themselves, their backs pressed against each other. Pete gripped his axe tightly while Peter knocked an arrow to his bow, the string taut with anticipation. Pete's eyes narrowed as he taunted the vampires. "Come on, you blood-sucking pigs." Peter took aim at Misha, a leering vampire before him. Misha's fangs glinted as he charged forward, a blur of motion. The arrow whistled through the air, finding its mark between Misha's eyes with a sickening thud. The vampire's head snapped back, his body crumpling to the ground. "Whoa!" Pete breathed, impressed by Peter's marksmanship. Lev, another vampire, lunged at Pete, his claws outstretched. Pete swung his axe, barely blocking the attack. They grappled, falling to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Lev's fangs hovered inches from Pete's throat as he strained to keep the axe between them. Peter dispatched vampires with deadly precision, his arrows finding their targets unerringly. He caught sight of Pete's struggle and reacted instantly. An arrow hissed past Pete's face, embedding itself in the back of Lev's skull. Blood splattered across Pete's face as the vampire went limp. With a swift kick, Peter dislodged Lev's body from Pete and helped him to his feet. Pete wiped the blood from his face with a shaky hand. "Sorry about that," Peter apologized, his voice tinged with concern. "It's okay," Pete reassured him, his grip tightening on the axe. Another vampire, Mika, charged at them, a snarl ripping from his throat. Pete met the attack head-on, his axe cleaving Mika's skull in two with a sickening crunch. Surprise flickered across Pete's face at the devastating blow. As Peter moved deeper into the cave, he paused to retrieve arrows from the fallen vampires. Pete glanced around, taking in the carnage they had wrought. Vampire corpses littered the ground, their lifeless eyes staring into the void. "Hey, Peter, wait up," Pete called out, hurrying to catch up with his companion. The cave loomed before them, its depths shrouded in darkness. The stench of death and decay hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence. Pete and Peter exchanged a determined look, their resolve hardening. They knew the true horrors awaited them deeper within the vampire's lair, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Side by side, they ventured into the unknown, their weapons at the ready. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist around them, as if alive with malevolent intent. But Pete and Peter pressed on, their bond and shared purpose driving them forward. They had come too far to turn back now, and they would see this mission through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. Peter strode through the entrance hallway, purpose etched into every line of his face. Pete trailed behind him, axe poised for action. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the stone walls, heightening the sense of foreboding. 20 feet ahead, Sandor stood sentinel beside a door, his eyes glinting with malice. "Hey guys, what are you doing here?" His voice dripped with false cordiality. Peter's response came in the form of an arrow, knocked and released in one fluid motion. It pierced Sandor's chest, sending him to his knees. Blood bubbled from his lips as he glared at Peter, hatred burning in his gaze. Another arrow found its mark, embedding itself in Sandor's forehead. His eyes widened in shock before he toppled backwards, lifeless. Peter retrieved the arrows, stepping over the fallen vampire to push open the door to the main room. Pete followed, pausing beside Sandor's corpse. "Sorry, Sandor," he muttered, a twinge of regret in his voice. The main room was awash in candlelight, the flickering flames casting an otherworldly glow. 10 vampires stood in a circle, their faces twisted with hunger. In the center, Lily sat bound to a chair, a blindfold obscuring her vision. Dasko circled her like a predator, his low singing a sinister accompaniment to the scene. Milena watched from the altar, a malevolent presence overseeing the macabre gathering. The floor was littered with the bodies of partygoers, their lifeless forms a testament to the vampire's earlier feeding frenzy. Peter and Pete halted abruptly, taken aback by the gruesome sight. The vampire's attention snapped to them, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Dasko wove through the throng, revealing Lily's helpless form. Peter took a determined step forward, but Pete's hand gripped his shoulder. "Peter, are you sure about this?" Pete's voice was laced with concern. "It's already too late," Peter replied, his resolve unwavering. In a blur of motion, Peter knocked an arrow and released it, aiming for Dasko. With preternatural speed, Dasko snatched the arrow mid-flight and hurled it back. It struck Pete in the right shoulder, eliciting a cry of agony. "Ah! What the hell, Peter?" Pete shouted, his face contorted in pain. The vampire surged forward, a wave of undead fury. Dasko watched, a twisted smile playing on his lips. Peter yanked the arrow from Pete's shoulder, ignoring his friend's anguished scream. "Sorry, I need it," Peter muttered, already knocking the bloodied arrow. He unleashed a volley of arrows, each one finding its mark in a vampire's skull. 7 fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Pete struggled to lift his axe, his wounded shoulder throbbing. Sherry, a female vampire, lunged at him, her fangs bared. Desperate, Pete fumbled in his pocket, producing cloves of garlic. As Sherry tackled him, he smashed the garlic into her face. She sank her teeth into the left side of his neck, even as she recoiled from the garlic's searing touch. Sherry's scream of agony mingled with the hiss of her flesh burning, a livid red mark spreading across her cheek. Pete slumped to the ground, unconscious. Peter raced to his side, dropping to one knee beside his fallen friend. "Pete! Pete! Pete!" he called, cradling Pete's face in his hands. But the vampires were upon them, dragging Peter away from Pete's prone form. "No!" Peter's cry echoed through the chamber, a desperate plea swallowed by the darkness. The battle raged on, the air thick with the scent of blood and death. Peter fought with every ounce of his being, his arrows finding their targets with deadly accuracy. But the vampires were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. As Peter was overwhelmed, his thoughts turned to Lily, still bound and helpless. He had come so far, risked everything to save her, but now it seemed their fate was sealed. The vampires closed in, their eyes glinting with hunger and triumph. In that moment, Peter knew true despair. The weight of his failure crushed him, even as the vampire's claws and fangs tore at his flesh. His last thought was of Pete, his loyal friend, lying motionless on the cold stone floor. The darkness claimed him, and the world faded away, leaving only the echo of their final, futile stand against the undead horde. Peter found himself tied to a chair, Lily bound beside him. Dasco emerged from the shadows, his fingers deftly removing Lily's blindfold. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Surprise flashed across her face as she turned to Peter. "Peter, what are you doing here?" Lily's voice trembled. "Are you okay?" Peter asked, concern etched in his features. Lily's gaze darted around the room, taking in the eerie surroundings. "Are these really vampires?" Peter confirmed with a subtle nod, his eyes locked on his bow and arrows, tantalizingly out of reach. Dasco paced before them, his low humming a sinister melody. Boris and Jasha, two formidable vampires, flanked him. Milena observed from the sidelines, her presence a silent threat. "What's happening?" Lily whispered, fear lacing her words. "I think they're making us vampires," Peter replied, his voice tight. Lily's eyes widened. "Vampires? Peter." "It's okay," Peter assured her, his mind racing. Concealed within his sleeve, an arrow waited. With deft movements, Peter exposed the head, using it to saw at his bindings. Dasco approached an altar bathed in candlelight, his back to the captives. Boris stalked towards Peter, reaching for the ropes that held him. "Remember me?" Boris taunted, his words dripping with malice. A flood of memories assaulted Peter to the time he was in an alleyway, jumped by two thugs, then came face to face with Boris. Peter's hands trembled, fear consuming him more than during any previous altercation. As he struggled to his feet, Boris loomed before him, their faces mere inches apart. Peter's terrified gaze fixed on Boris's fanged teeth, a stark contrast to the vampire's stern expression. Suddenly, a blinding light pierced the darkness, searing Peter's eyes. He squinted against the glare as a delivery truck's horn shattered the silence. In a blur of motion, Boris vanished into the night sky. Peter shakes his head back to reality, his heart pounded as the memory faded, the echo of that fateful encounter still fresh in his mind. He forced himself to focus on the present, his fingers working furiously at the ropes that bound him. Lily watched helplessly, her own bindings secure. The vampires circled them, their anticipation palpable. Dasco's humming grew louder, the haunting melody sending shivers down their spines. Time seemed to slow as Peter neared freedom, the frayed rope giving way beneath his determined efforts. He caught Lily's eye, a silent communication passing between them. They had to act fast, seize any opportunity that presented itself. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The stench of death clung to the air, a reminder of the countless lives already lost. Peter steeled himself, knowing that their own fate hung in the balance. With a final tug, the ropes fell away. Peter lunged for his bow and arrows, his movements a blur. Boris reacted instantly, his inhuman speed propelling him towards Peter. The clash was inevitable, a desperate battle between human and vampire. Peter nocked an arrow, his aim true despite the chaos. The arrow whistled through the air, finding its mark in Boris's chest. Lily screamed, her voice mingling with the snarls of the enraged vampires. Dasco whirled around, his eyes blazing with fury. Milena sprang into action, her movements a deadly dance. Peter and Lily fought side by side, their survival dependent on each other. Arrows flew, finding their targets with unerring accuracy. The vampires pressed in, their hunger for blood insatiable. The battle raged, the outcome uncertain. Peter and Lily clung to each other, their bond a source of strength amidst the horror. They had come this far, risked everything to uncover the truth. Now, they faced the ultimate test, a fight for their very souls. As the vampires closed in, their fangs bared in anticipation, Peter and Lily prepared for their final stand. The darkness threatened to engulf them, but they refused to succumb. They would fight until their last breath, their love and determination a beacon in the endless night. "I do," Peter declared, his voice laced with grim determination. He gripped the arrowhead, driving it into Boris's chin with a sickening crunch. Blood gushed from the vampire's mouth, his eyes wide with shock and agony. Jasha, enraged by her fallen comrade, launched herself at Peter, her wings slicing through the air. Peter yanked the arrowhead from Boris's chin and hurled it at Jasha's chest. The projectile found its mark, and Jasha plummeted to the ground, her lifeless body crumpling upon impact. Milena seized Peter by the collar, hauling him to his feet. She unleashed a barrage of right hooks, her fists slamming into his face with relentless fury. Peter reeled from the onslaught, his head snapping back with each brutal blow. Suddenly, Milena halted her assault, gripping Peter's face with an iron grasp. She examined the bite marks on his neck, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Oh, they're already healed," she purred, her voice dripping with malice. Peter's eyes narrowed. "That was you?" Milena's smile widened. "Yes, you didn't taste as good as your father." The words hit Peter like a physical blow. "My father?" "Yes, your father," Milena confirmed, her tone laced with wicked satisfaction. Rage surged through Peter's veins. With a feral snarl, he lunged forward, sinking his teeth into Milena's throat. He bit down hard, tearing at her flesh with savage determination. With a vicious wrench, he ripped out her throat, blood spraying in a crimson mist. Milena's face froze in a grotesque mask of surprise and horror. Her eyes locked onto Dasko's, a final plea for help before she crumpled to the ground, her life extinguished. Peter snatched up his bow and quiver, nocking an arrow with fluid precision. He trained the arrow on Dasko, his gaze unwavering. Dasko held Lily captive on the altar, her hands bound behind her back. He gripped her neck, forcing her head to the side. His mouth yawned wide, revealing a mouthful of razor-sharp fangs. He cocked his head back, poised to sink his teeth into Lily's vulnerable flesh. Peter's eyes flicked to the candle flickering between them, its flame dancing in the darkness. With a swift motion, he shifted his aim, drawing the arrow back until the bowstring thrummed with tension. He released, and the arrow soared through the flames, igniting in a blaze of fire. The flaming arrow pierced Dasko's skull, mere inches from Lily's neck. Dasko toppled backward, his head engulfed in flames. Peter raced to Lily's side, enveloping her in a fierce embrace. "Ouch!" Lily winced, her voice muffled against Peter's chest. "What's the matter?" Peter asked, concern etched in his features. "My hands are still tied together," Lily explained, her wrists straining against the bonds. Peter swiftly sliced through the ropes with an arrowhead, freeing her hands. Lily flung her arms around his neck, clinging to him with desperate relief. "Come on, we need to get out of here," Peter urged, his voice heavy with urgency. They emerged from the cave, the first rays of dawn painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Angelo sat up, blinking in confusion as he surveyed his surroundings. "Angelo?" Peter called out, rushing to his friend's side. "Peter, is that you?" Angelo's voice was weak, disoriented. "Yeah, come on, let's get you home," Peter reassured him, helping Angelo to his feet. Peter's gaze swept the area, landing on his father's car parked a short distance away. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. They had survived the nightmare, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger long after the sun had risen. With Lily and Angelo by his side, Peter made his way towards the car, determined to leave the horrors of the vampire cave behind. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Peter slid into the driver's seat of his dad's car, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and urgency. Lily settled into the passenger seat beside him, while Angelo slumped in the back, his face pale and drawn. Frantically, Peter searched for the keys, his fingers fumbling in his haste. He yanked down the visor, and the keys tumbled into his lap, glinting in the early morning light. "Yes!" Peter exclaimed, a surge of triumph coursing through him. He jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Peter's hands caressed the steering wheel, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Oh, how I missed you," he murmured to the car, his voice filled with affection. With a sharp turn of the wheel, Peter backed up, maneuvering the vehicle around before accelerating down the dirt road. As they sped past the cave entrance, a figure caught Peter's eye. Pete stood there, hunched over, his hand pressed against his neck. Blood stained his clothes, a stark reminder of the horrors they had endured. "Pete!" Peter shouted, slamming on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, dust billowing in its wake. Peter leaped from the driver's seat, his feet hitting the ground with a thud. He raced towards Pete, his heart in his throat. "Pete!" Peter gasped, his voice raw with emotion. Pete lifted his head, his eyes meeting Peter's. A flicker of recognition, tinged with exhaustion, passed between them. "Peter," Pete croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. He paused, gathering his strength. "Let's go home." The words hung in the air. A plea and a promise rolled into one. Peter nodded, his throat tight with unshed tears. He reached out, grasping Pete's arm, supporting his weight as they stumbled towards the car. Lily and Angelo watched from the windows, their faces etched with concern. The sun crested the horizon, bathing the landscape in a soft, golden glow. It seemed almost surreal, a moment of peace after the chaos and violence of the night. Peter helped Pete into the back seat, careful not to aggravate his wounds. He slid behind the wheel once more, his hands gripping the steering wheel with newfound determination. As the car sped away from the vampire cave, Peter glanced in the rearview mirror. The entrance receded in the distance, a dark blemish on the otherwise tranquil landscape. The events of the night replayed in his mind, a kaleidoscope of terror and triumph. They had faced the monsters and emerged victorious, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger long after the sun had set. Peter knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but with Lily, Pete, and Angelo by his side, he felt a flicker of hope. The car ate up the miles, carrying them towards an uncertain future. But one thing was certain: they were alive, and they were together. And in that moment, as the sun rose higher in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and orange, that was enough. Peter steered the car towards home, towards the promise of safety and healing. The nightmare was over, but the journey had only just begun. With grim determination, he pressed down on the accelerator, propelling them forward into the unknown. As Peter navigated the winding road, the silence in the car was broken by Pete's voice, tinged with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "How did you survive?" Pete asked Angelo, his gaze fixed on the man seated beside him. "I watched them bite you." Angelo's lips curled into a faint smile, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "Garlic," he replied, his tone almost nonchalant. "I told you it has its benefits." Pete shook his head, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. He twisted in his seat, stealing a glance at the cave as it receded in the distance, a dark blot on the horizon. In the front, Peter's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, the cave's image capturing his attention for a fleeting moment. A gentle squeeze on his hand drew his gaze downward, and he found Lily's fingers intertwined with his own. Their eyes met, a silent exchange of understanding and affection passing between them. Smiles tugged at the corners of their mouths, a brief respite from the horrors they had endured. The car sped onwards, putting distance between them and the nightmarish cave. The rising sun painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, a promise of a new day, a chance for healing and hope. As they approached Pete's house, Peter eased the car to a stop, the engine idling softly. He twisted in his seat, his eyes searching the faces of his companions. "Are you sure you guys don't want to go to the hospital?" he asked, concern etched in his features. Angelo shook his head, a reassuring smile on his face. "We'll be fine," he said, his voice steady. "I'll take care of him." With a nod, Angelo pushed open the car door and stepped out. the cool morning air rushing in to fill the space he had vacated. Peter reached out, grasping Pete's hand in a firm grip. Their eyes locked, a wordless exchange of gratitude and camaraderie. Pete nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Before releasing Peter's hand and following Angelo out of the car, Peter watched as they made their way towards the house, their figures silhouetted against the brightening sky. The weight of the night's events settled heavily on his shoulders, a burden he knew would take time to shed. Beside him, Lily sat in contemplative silence, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the windshield. Peter knew that the scars they bore, both visible and invisible, would not fade easily. But as he looked at her, he felt a flicker of hope, a sense that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a deep breath, Peter put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving Pete's house in the rearview mirror. The road stretched out before them, a symbol of the journey they had embarked upon. It was a path fraught with uncertainty and pain, but also one that held the promise of healing and redemption. As the car merged with the early morning traffic, Peter felt a sense of purpose, a determination to unravel the mysteries that still lingered. The vampire threat may have been vanquished, but the questions remained, haunting the edges of his consciousness. Beside him, Lily reached out, her hand finding his once more. Her touch was a silent reminder of the strength they had found in each other, a bond forged in the crucible of horror and survival. Together, they drove on, the rising sun at their backs, ready to face whatever challenges the future held. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but with each mile, they moved closer to understanding, to closure, and perhaps to a new beginning. Peter steered the car to a halt in front of Lily's house, the engine idling softly. He turned to face her, his eyes searching her face with a mixture of concern and affection. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Lily met his gaze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yeah, I'll be fine," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter sensed a shift in her demeanor, a heaviness that hung in the air between them. "Is something the matter?" Lily's lips trembled as she spoke, her words filled with raw emotion. "I can't believe what you did, Peter. You saved my life." "Of course," Peter said, his tone unwavering. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of his devotion, his willingness to risk everything for her. In a moment of pure instinct, Lily leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a tender kiss. Peter pulled her close, their embrace a sanctuary from the horrors they had faced. Time seemed to stand still as they held each other, the warmth of their bodies a reminder of the life they had fought so hard to protect. Peter pushed open the front door of his home, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and trepidation. "Mom?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. From the kitchen, his mother emerged, balancing 2 plates of breakfast in her hands. She placed them on the dining table, a warm smile on her face. "Hey, Peter!" she greeted him, her voice filled with affection. Peter's brow furrowed, confusion etched in his features. "Mom, is everything okay? Where were you?" His mother's smile never wavered as she reached into the pocket of her flannel nightgown. "I went to get you medicine and groceries," she explained, pulling out a bottle of NyQuil. She pressed it into Peter's hand, her touch a reassuring presence. "Come, Petey, sit and let's have breakfast," she urged, gesturing towards the table. Peter sank into his chair, his mind reeling with the events of the night. The aroma of the freshly prepared meal wafted around him, a stark contrast to the stench of death and decay that had clung to his nostrils mere hours ago. As they ate, Peter studied his mother's face, searching for any sign of the worry or fear that had consumed him. But her expression was serene, a picture of normalcy in the midst of the chaos that had upended his world. The clatter of utensils against plates filled the silence, a mundane soundtrack to the surreal scene. Peter's thoughts raced, questions burning on the tip of his tongue. But for now, he allowed himself this moment of respite, this fleeting glimpse of the life he had once known. He savored each bite, the flavors bursting on his tongue, a reminder of the simple pleasures that had seemed so distant in the face of the horrors he had witnessed. Across the table, his mother smiled at him, her love a beacon in the darkness that had threatened to engulf him. As they finished their meal, Peter felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, despite the scars he carried, both visible and invisible, there was still a chance for healing, for a return to some semblance of normalcy. But even as he clung to that hope, he knew that the events of the night would forever be etched in his memory, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of everyday life. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over, and Peter knew that he would have to be vigilant, ready to face whatever challenges the future held. For now, though, he allowed himself this moment of peace, this precious time with his mother. Together they cleared the table, the mundane task a welcome respite from the chaos that had consumed his world. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm glow through the kitchen windows, Peter felt a flicker of determination, a resolve to face whatever lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that love and family would always be his greatest strength. The night air hung heavy with an eerie stillness, the entrance to the vampire caves a gaping maw of darkness. Suddenly, movement stirred within the shadows, a slow awakening of the damned. Luigi, Niccolo, and Sergio, their faces ashen and pale, rose from the cold embrace of death. Their movements were sluggish, limbs stiff from the rigor of mortality. Grunts echoed in the stillness, a primal language of the undead. Inside the cave, the partygoers stirred, their eyes fluttering open to reveal a lifeless gaze. Their once vibrant faces were now marred by the ravages of death, skin peeling away in grotesque strips. They clambered to their feet, a macabre assembly of the newly risen. In a distant open field, the earth trembled, a faint rumbling that grew in intensity. Suddenly, a hand burst through the soil, fingers clawing at the air with a desperate hunger. The ground heaved and shifted as more hands emerged, a grotesque birthing of the undead. The night came alive with a symphony of horror, the grunts and moans of the risen mingling with the whisper of the wind. The air crackled with an unholy energy, a palpable sense of dread that permeated every corner of the darkness. Luigi, Niccolo, and Sergio stumbled forward, their movements growing more fluid with each passing moment. Their eyes glinted with a feral intensity, a hunger that could never be sated. They exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke of a shared purpose, a dark mission that had only just begun. Inside the cave, the partygoers shambled towards the entrance, their tattered clothing hanging in shreds from their emaciated frames. Their faces were twisted in a grotesque parody of life, mouths agape in a silent scream of agony. The field became a writhing mass of bodies as more and more of the undead clawed their way to the surface. They rose like a twisted crop, their skin pale and lifeless in the moonlight. The stench of decay hung heavy in the air, a cloying sweetness that turned the stomach. As the undead gathered, a sense of purpose seemed to ripple through their ranks. They moved with a newfound urgency, a dark determination that propelled them forward. The night became their ally, cloaking their movements in shadow as they set out into the world, a plague upon the living. In the distance, the lights of the town twinkled, oblivious to the horror that had just been unleashed. The undead moved towards those lights, a relentless tide of hunger and despair. The world was about to be plunged into a nightmare from which there may be no waking, a darkness that would consume all in its path. And so, the army of the undead marched on, their footsteps a drumbeat of doom that echoed through the night. The battle had only just begun, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of oblivion.